Hello and welcome to Retro Reviews, my channel where I review my favorite retro video games of all time as well as some modern releases I have recently finished. Today I want to look over my favorite top 10 Game Boy games, the original Game Boy, not including Game Boy Color even. I'm going to be doing a separate list on that later because they are technically two separate consoles, even though the Game Boy Color can play the original Game Boy games. But I want to talk about some of my favorites. Now this console actually predates me, but I was lucky enough with my Game Boy Advance, I was able to play a lot of the old games when I'd find them at like yard sales or thrift shops. So I did play a lot of the original Game Boy games, even though I didn't have an original Game Boy myself until much later on in life. Now I played a lot of the extra games through like virtual consoles or through ROMs after I acquired the cartridges. So I wanted to go over my favorites for this console because it is absolutely fantastic. A couple games that won't be on this list are like Mario Land 1, Wario Land 1, Kirby's Dream Land 1, mostly because I'm going to be focusing on some sequels here. Any of the Final Fantasy games for that because I never played any of them, and stuff like Castlevania as well. I didn't play the Castlevania games on the Game Boy. But with that out of the way, let's get into number 10, which is going to be Donkey Kong 94. This is like a successor to the Donkey Kong Jr. franchise and the original Donkey Kong arcade. This is kind of a precursor to the Mario vs. Donkey Kong series that we know today. Recently got a remake for the Nintendo Switch of the original game that came out on the Game Boy Advance. This was kind of a precursor to that. It's just like the arcade game or any of the Mario vs. Donkey Kong titles. You play as Mario trying to get Pauline, and that's all it is really. But it's really unique. It has like 100 different levels in it. It's got a lot of great puzzles there. It's really fun, and I like what they did with this, and I like that this kind of inspired the series going forward. Number 9 is going to be the Game & Watch Gallery, which has 4 games. They're all fairly charming, and they actually have a couple references to Game & Watch in Smash Brothers as well, found in this original gallery. So you have one, I think it's Manhole, where you play as Yoshi trying to cover manholes as characters walk across. You have another that's Fire, where they're like burning buildings and stuff. You have to get them, bounce them to safety. You have a couple other ones like Octopus. This is a reference in Smash. You have the final Smash for Game Watch. It turns into a giant octopus. In the Game Watch Gallery, you're trying to avoid an octopus grabbing you while you dive for treasure. And the other one is Oil Panic, which is Game & Watch's Bucket in Smash, where you try and catch oil to not let it fan a fire. So really cool, very fun, pretty charming, like little mini games you can play. I think this is definitely a nice collection here. I like the later collections better. I do like the old Game & Watch titles. I think they're pretty fun. But this was a really nice entry and a good start to the series in general. I guess a compilation of the old series since they appeared much earlier. Number 8 on my list is going to be Wario Blast, which is a fun, weird crossover between Wario and Bomberman. If you like Bomberman, you're probably going to like this game. And I love that the crossover works pretty well, despite Wario feeling maybe a little bit out of place. At the same time, he's like this greedy, big, chunky man. He almost makes sense that he'd like throw bombs out of like a big sack or something. I actually really like this crossover. I'm just a sucker for Bomberman games. I ended up getting Bomberman R on the Nintendo Switch day one because I just really love it and I was really nostalgic. This game is really fun and it works very well on the Game Boy. Number 7 is going to be Kirby's Dream Land 2. I talked about I wasn't including number 1 on my list because 2 I think is a much better game overall. You have lots of great environments. You'll be swimming, you'll be floating, you'll be taking power-ups, all the normal Kirby stuff. But in this game, they added animal companions as well. They give you all sorts of unique abilities and ways to traverse. I thought it was such a wild, wacky idea. It was actually one of the most fun mechanics in any Kirby game. I really love it. I'd love for them to bring it back in the future as well. Number 6 is going to be Tetris, a classic. Everybody loves Tetris. In fact, it's the best-selling video game of all time by a significant margin, eclipsing Minecraft by I think double the amount of sales total when you count like all the cartridge sales, all of the digital sales for any platform ever. It's got something like 500 million plus units sold. So Tetris is the most popular video game of all time, and this is kind of where the craze started with the Game Boy. It sold like gangbusters on this console. I know it kind of got me into Tetris originally. People often play in like the World Championships on the NES version, but this is where it kind of started here on the Game Boy, getting a really big popular player base here. Number 5 is going to be Mario Land 2, which is a huge improvement from Mario Land 1. Whereas the pixel people on Mario Land 1 are pretty small and it's not really fleshed out, Mario Land 2 did a much better job. You have like the Mario World model of Mario in this game and it looks and plays fantastic. It's just overall a much more solid experience. A great platformer, a significant upgrade from the original, and a great testament to how well Mario works on the go. I love that this is a unique adventure, not like a port or a remake of anything. It's a weird, wacky time, and it's a ton of fun. Number 4 is going to be Wario Land 2, which I like much better than Mario Land 2 for a lot of reasons. First and foremost, I think Wario is a really fun character to play as. I like the mechanics. I love his side-scrolling. I really liked Wario Land 1, but Wario Land 2 is just an improvement in pretty much every single way. Better level design, better mechanics. It doesn't feel as floaty. It's just a more solid experience. I think they learned from what they did in the original. I think most of the Game Boy games that they had when they made sequels for them, they just improved upon them in such major ways. The sequels ended up being great, and that's exactly what happened with Wario Land 2. Number 3 is going to be Metroid 2 Return of Samus, which is a really unique game. It is a big step up from the original Metroid in a lot of ways. It's pretty hard to navigate. I remember I got this one secondhand on eBay for like 13 bucks way back in the day because I love the Metroid series and I wanted to go back and try this one. And it was so maddeningly hard to navigate. But the game is fantastic. Great level design. You have great, like, the Metroidvania aspects where you have to go back and utilize your power-ups and everything. Works so beautifully here. Fantastic boss designs. It makes sense that they remade this game for the 3DS because right here, it really kicked off a great a thing for the series. And I think it helped inspire what made Super Metroid so fantastic later on. It's still a great game to this day. If you've played the remake, I highly encourage you to go out and play the original game because it is a lot of fun. And if you can get like a map online and kind of map out where you need to be going and have a guide helping you along the way, you'll have a fantastic experience with this one. Number 2 is going to be Pokemon Yellow or Pokemon Blue, Red, whatever one you want to do for your favorite version. My favorite's Pokemon Yellow because you got a little Pikachu following you around. It's super cute. And it's a nice remake of the original two, putting them together. I like the package versions as more than the originals that came before it. Like Emerald, I like much more than Ruby and Sapphire. I like the compilations typically. But all the Pokemon games, the original Pokemon games for the Game Boy, are iconic for a huge reason. They inspired this entire genre, the most popular media franchise of all time, and the most profitable as well. I love what Pokemon did with the original 151. I think the design is fantastic. I love trying to catch them all. I love trying to beat all the way through the Elite Four, and it's just everything about Pokemon started here, and they nailed it so well. It makes sense why they haven't done a whole lot of like innovation on the Pokemon formula. Not to say that they haven't, but the fact that they've mostly iterated and like changed some mechanics and such, but kept the overall focus pretty much the same since the Game Boy era is a testament to how well they nailed this game on the head. Absolutely fantastic RPG. Definitely the best one on the Game Boy. But number 1 is going to be Link's Awakening, which is one of my favorite Zelda games of all time. This game is so good. The dungeon design is peak. They did some really fantastic work here. And what's even better is they made it really fun to move around. The Game Boy has, a D-pad, not like a stick or anything like that. It's way before that time. But it feels like you have a lot of freedom of movement. It doesn't feel stiff to be going right and then up. You can go diagonal by holding both buttons. It just controls so much better than you expect it to on such an old console. The fact that they implemented stuff like jumping in this game with Link with the Rock's Feather and everything is really cool. I'm surprised they're able to make it work on this hardware, but it plays beautifully. There's so much content in this game, so many extra things you can do. Link's Awakening truly is probably the best game on the Game Boy, and then when they remade it with DX on the Game Boy Color, it's probably the best one on that one as well. I won't be including that on my Game Boy Color one since it exists on this one, but it absolutely is my favorite Game Boy game of all time. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know in the comments down below what your favorite Game Boy games. Let me know the things I missed, because I didn't play a ton of them back in the day, but these are just my favorites. I'd love to hear yours as well. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.